Hello.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Lee Kreimer. I am on the team of Lincoln Calling, and we also have with us here Kaylee Newman, who's one of our board members. And we're really excited to be here with you today for the second episode, of Calling for Change, How and Why to Get Involved in Your Community. And today we are really excited to connect with what we talked about last week and talk more about data. So we'll be delving into how to find and use good data, how to use data to tell your story and testify, and how to feel prepared for doing that. So as I mentioned, my name is Lee Kreimer, and I work at the Asian Community and Cultural Center, and I'm also really excited to be working with Lincoln Calling this year again and planning programming and a festival for this fall. And we're really excited to be here today too, as the second installment, as I mentioned, in partnership with Civic Nebraska. So I'll let Kayleigh, I will let you introduce yourself as well.
Sure, thanks, Lee. My name is Kaylee Newman. I'm here today as a board member of Lincoln Calling. We're pretty awesome, check us out. But in my day job, I work for Nebraska Appleseed, where I'm the grants coordinator. So I use data all the time to tell stories with our funders around why is this work important, what's the impact of our work. And before that, I worked doing research and evaluation for a university. So we're super excited to have two really great presenters today. So their names are Jeff Moscaritolo and Isabel Salas. So Jeff, I'm going to turn over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Moscaritolo. I worked for the last 5 years, as a professor of writing and literature at Doane University. And I just left that position because I'm going to be starting a PhD in Indiana this fall. But I've been teaching for a while as a writing professor. And I also, in terms of relevance to this topic of presenting information and research in the form of a speech, perhaps. I had a whole bunch of experience as a kid on speech teams in high school and college, and then as a coach of speech teams, both at the high school and college level. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Isabel, can you introduce yourself really quick?
Hey, everyone. My name is Isabel. I'm a community organizer at an organization called South of Downtown Community Development Organization, where we focus on the areas around the Capitol, so from 9th to 17th and K to A streets, on basically improving the quality of life for everyone, and really, truly meaning everyone in the most holistic way. So that's what I do during the day, but I am super, super passionate about getting involved locally in local politics, in the ways in the world that you feel like you can make the most change and have the most impact. So I'm super happy to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much. We threw together just a quick kind of Google Doc that has some resources on where to find data, how to know good data, and also some information about like how to get involved with local politics, so either at the city or the state level. So we're going to send that out in the comments, so check out the Google Doc there. But otherwise, I think we can go ahead and dive right in. So Jeff, I'm going to start with you. How do you find good data, and how do you identify what is good data?
Well, I think the kind of pre-question before we look for good data is what actually counts as data. We might assume that data needs to have numbers in it, and a lot of good data does have numbers in it, but it doesn't need to. We can use a kind of more expansive definition of the term data to refer to, possibly a study that has numbers describing how things happen, but it could also refer to a personal account that somebody who experienced something directly has. That is also a kind of data. So when we're talking about data, I want to kind of make sure we contextualize it that way. In terms of how to find good data, obviously there's a lot of information out there on the internet, and not all of it is good for all purposes. And so it's important for us to make sure that we have built up our information literacy. As a teacher at the college level, this is something that we kind of use a bunch. There's an acronym that at Doan we use this, and I know that other systems do this as well. An acronym that is about source evaluation, and it's called the CRAP test. It's literally what it's called. It's an acronym, CRAAP. And so this is like, it's a useful acronym to remember. C stands for currency. How recent is the information that you're getting? And is it up to date? Has there been new information that maybe cancels out the old information or something like that? Relevancy is R, referring to how relevant the information is to whatever the topic is that you're talking about. Accuracy, is it accurate information? Can you verify it maybe with multiple sources, or is it only coming from this one source that's looking a little shady? Authority, what authority does the source have to speak about whatever you're using it to say? And then purpose. Purpose is an important question because when we're evaluating the purpose of a source, we're thinking, what does this maybe publication or the organization that puts out this publication, or maybe this individual, what motivations do they have to tell this narrative, and how might that be affecting the way that they tell the narrative for better or worse? So that's the CRAP test. And you just kind of, it's, you don't necessarily need to go through every single letter in the word to make sure that you're evaluating your source as well. But it's a good idea to just be always thinking critically about all the information that you're getting. Not so critically that, you can't trust any source, but just that healthy amount of skepticism. So that's one thing that we want to remember. We also want to remember, this is something that I hear happen a lot, and I see it a lot in the students that I've taught. There's a big confusion that I see between what counts as bias and what counts as just taking a position. I feel like a lot of times we hear people talking about a source or a person or an expert or someone who is being biased and therefore unreliable. But oftentimes the identification of that person as biased is simply noting that they are taking a stand on an issue, that they're making an argument. And that's not what bias is. Bias is skewing information or intentionally omitting important information in order to alter the narrative. And you can have argumentative bias whether you're making an overt argument or not. And you can also make an argument in a non-biased, balanced approach. So that's an important thing to note there. So those are just some good mental exercises, I think, for us to kind of go through when we're evaluating info.
That was really, really helpful. Thank you. Isabel, is there anything else that you'd want to add from your experience?
Yeah, no, I really like this CRAP acronym. I think it's super fun because we're pointing out hey, that's not cool. It's crap. And so, yeah, I think that's really important, especially right now as we're seeing the way that data is being misrepresented and kind of used to advance things that aren't entirely telling the whole truth of a situation. It's just really, really annoying. But I do really like the distinction that you made, Jeff, about the lived experience also being data in itself. And that's something that I've definitely focused on through my work at South of Downtown is not only do people in leadership positions and elected representatives want to hear the numbers and the facts, but they also want to hear it tied back to the lived experience. And because that lived experience is something that is your truth and something that can't be taken away from you.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. I'm going to go ahead and move us on to our next question then. And so is that basically what are the spaces where you can do advocacy and how do you access those spaces? Isabel, do you want to kick us off on that?
Yeah, so I think I'm really enjoying this wave of energy behind city advocacy because I've been working on it for a few years now, and I've learned from other community members how they've been able to access the city processes. And so we are seeing a big energy push around city council. And for 2 meetings of the month, city council has reserved time for an open comment at the end of a meeting. And one of those meetings is at 3, and the other one of those meetings is at 5:30. And that's just a place where people can go in and literally talk about anything. So I can go in and talk about how much I love my cats. And that's my space. That's my prerogative. Or you can go and talk about things that aren't scheduled to be on a future agenda. For example, we have been hearing about the recycling centers being consolidated by the city. And one of those sites that was consolidated and removed was the one on 11th and South Street for a number of different reasons. And so if folks wanted to talk about that, I mean, that would definitely be an avenue that you can use. But as far as other places go, we have a wealth of knowledge in our own community members who serve on different boards and commissions. So, and all of those have meetings, and all of those meetings have open comments too. So it's not that our city is inaccessible, but the introduction to that knowledge in itself hasn't been the most transparent thing, which is what myself and my colleagues have been trying to work on across the city, is just letting it be known how easy it is to file a permit for a block party. And how easy it is to show up and talk to your city council members. And they always want to hear from their constituents too.
That's awesome. Could you tell us a little more about what are some of the norms and rules of those spaces?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think that that's something that it makes us uncomfortable, right? The reason that you feel uncomfortable in a space is because you literally don't know what you're supposed to do or where you're supposed to go, who you're supposed to talk to. And so at least at the city council level, there's a number of different norms and rules that we've tried to outline. So if I could get our producer, Matt, can you pull up that document that I had mentioned? Okay, we're going to stand by. I'm going to talk about it anyway. So we put together this resource that is really, really hard to find an actual resource for, but we just based it off of our lived experience and talking with folks who are city council members or have experience talking to city council. And so, one second. Okay. So one of the things that people just don't know is first of all, the ability to comment on anything that you want really on an agenda, as long as it's listed under public hearing. So you can comment on people being appointed to manage liquor licenses. You can comment on different people being appointed to a different board or commission. You can comment on someone building a development right across the street from you. All of those things are possible. And so the thing that really is unnerving, and kind of what Jeff will talk about a little bit later, is how do you make that public comment? So you have to go in and you have to sit and wait until you hear agenda item called by the chairperson. And then the council person will read the agenda item, and then you have to wait for either the pro side, and then the opposition side, and then the neutral side. So you kind of have to know, like, if you go up there and you're like, I'm actually against this thing and I'm commenting on the wrong portion of it, it makes you feel a little bit awkward. And then when you are up there and talking with folks, you can say literally anything that you want. Obviously, don't be rude, but this is your time to share your experience. And this is your time to talk about how this certain agenda item or your public comment is relative to your representatives. And so one thing that they will ask you for is for your name, to spell your name, your address, so they know where you are geographically, and also who your representative is. And then they will also give you markers for time on, like, you have 1 minute left. And sometimes that throws me off because I forget someone's going to interrupt me and say 1 minute. But it's just a little friendly reminder. And usually you have 5 minutes to talk about something. And you can use that based on, in front of you, there's a green, yellow, and a red light. And use that to kind of guide where you should be in your comments. So yeah, that's a little bit of a rundown on the city council, because that's a really, really accessible way to make comments. one thing that I've learned through experience is in working with a group called Renters Together, you can all coordinate testimony with your friends, go up there and say, I'm so-and-so with Renters Together. And then all of a sudden you're like a formal group, which is cool because it's just a few folks that decided to talk about renters issues in front of city council. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh, we're validated as a group, which is amazing.
That's so awesome. I love that example about Renters Together. Thank you for sharing that. Jeff, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, sometimes you get that light thing, the marker telling you how much time you have left. Sometimes they just say 1 minute left while you're in the middle of a sentence. So that's a good thing to be aware that like that happens. And yeah, it's a pretty intimidating space. It's like you're just standing up there and the city council is sitting up above you, raised up above you. That's currently the format. And also, I guess it's important to remember, and by the way, Isabel, this is such an awesome resource that y'all put together. I love that that document exists. Another thing to remember is that you're being videotaped or video recorded. It's not really on tape anymore. And that's going to be put on YouTube. All those public comment sections, really the whole city council meetings, all those public city council meetings go up on the official webpage on YouTube. They don't tend to get a ton of views, but it is good to know that you're being recorded, and you never know what might go viral. So that's something else to think about.
Super valid point. Thank you for that. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I was curious, do either of you have any thoughts or tips on what about at the state legislature?
Yeah, so the state legislature is an entirely different beast, but also it happens and they have hearings all the time. We just maybe don't know about them or don't care about the hearings that they're having. So usually we are watching the state legislature like I was now today, and they're debating bills on the floor. So the time for public input has passed on those. But before that, in the first part of the session, they have hearings. And on any given afternoon at 1:30 p.m., which is so not an accessible time, but that's a whole different thing. At 1:30, there are different hearings for different standing committees at the legislature. So a lot of the housing issues that I care about come up under Judiciary Committee, where they're talking about the Landlord-Tenant Act, or they come under Urban Affairs Committee, where they're talking about anything related to urban affairs in this state of Nebraska. So I would say if you have any interest in the legislature, definitely pay attention once those bills get dropped to the hearing schedules. And if you have, for example, if you're really passionate about education, follow the education committee. Look up what their hearing schedules are beginning mid-February, early to mid-February, and see what they're talking about. Maybe there's something that you really care about. Or if you are interested in housing issues like me, that gets a little bit different because there's either talking about the landlord-tenant law or the building of housing and housing availability, which is in urban affairs. There's, I think, 12 standing committees, 10 or 12, I can't remember, focused on different issues. And that's your place where you can go and say, hi, my name's Isabel. I'm here to support this bill, and here's why.
Thank you. And I think in that Google Doc we sent out, we included a couple of links to some of the calendars for both Lincoln City Council, but also the state legislature and how you can learn more about the committees that Isabel was just talking about. Jeff, is there anything else you want to add before we move on?
No, not on that.
Cool.
All right, sounds great. So the next thing we'd like to talk about is we've talked about some of these spaces where folks can engage in different advocacy in our community, and we've also talked about data. And so part of the core of this conversation is how do we really combine those elements and use data to tell a story? So for both of you, Isabel and Jeff, how can we use good quality data from a variety of sources to tell a story, and how do you also get up and actually talk? So Isabel, first, would you like to talk about how to use data for a story and how to be brave? Yeah,
so I am traditionally really bad at the quantitative data, but I have a really big interest in the qualitative data, and I always am trying to push myself to talk about the quantitative stuff. So I'm really interested if anyone else wants to talk about that. But the way that we are using data is highlighting the lived experience of the folks who are living in our neighborhood. And this comes through, so the project that I'm a part of called Collective Impact Lincoln, it's a partnership between Civic Nebraska, Nebraska Appleseed, and us at South of Downtown. And so we're working in 6 core neighborhoods in the city and just going before COVID, going door to door and asking people, what do you like about your neighborhood? What do you want to see improve? And we had a bunch of different other questions about housing, healthcare, access to transportation, jobs and wages. And there was a wealth of data that came from that. Not a lot of it was quantitative, but a lot of it was qualitative in the minutia of conversation and in the context of someone's lived experience. And so I think that that's really interesting, and it's really helped us talk about different things like people's housing situations. So people who have very positive housing situations, they often mention that their landlord is very communicative with them and they can talk with them and that they feel comfortable reaching out if there's ever a problem. And that's something that was really surprising to us because we didn't expect it to be that interpersonal to determine someone's success in their housing situation. And another one is really, really surprising. So on safety, we had noticed a trend that when we're talking to people about how safe they feel in their neighborhood, they were also saying that they feel safe because they have friends in the neighborhood or because they know their neighbors. Knowing your neighbors is really, really critical because you know that people are keeping an eye on you and that someone is going to be there for you if you ever have an emergency or something comes up. So it's been really interesting to get that lived experience data and kind of bring it to light and kind of show the whole picture of our neighborhood. Lots of people like to live here because their friends are here and they really like seeing people who don't look like them or who aren't from the same background as them. And then some people just live here out of necessity because it's the most affordable part of the city for them to live in.
That's awesome. And I'm kind of wondering too, so I can tell, and also knowing you and working with you too in various capacities, I know that you speak with a variety of people in different contexts about your work. And I'm wondering, how did you develop the confidence or the openness to engage in these conversations with people? And how would you encourage folks who might be doing this for the first time or are thinking about doing it? How can you get started?
Yeah, I think one thing is the fear of being turned down by someone or someone doesn't want to talk to you. But you just kind of have to be like, okay, they didn't want to talk to me and that's it. There's nothing that I can change about that. So let's just go on to the next one. So that door-to-door work really kind of builds up your tolerance for being rejected in a weird way. But then when you're talking to city council folk or other elected representatives, especially if you have talked to your neighbors or you know the story of your friends and colleagues, that is all that you need to know to tell them about your lived experience or the lived experience of your community. They can't tell you that you're wrong because someone literally experienced this thing. And this is something that is integral to their perspective, to their worldview. And so that has been really big in realizing my confidence in speaking up and telling people the stories of our neighborhood and the ways that they are not uniform, but there are patterns and trends about affordable housing or the safety of the neighborhood or the sense of pride and social connectedness. Just owning that and being confident in your ability to speak to your lived experience and the lived experience of your community is really critical.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And Jeff, I know that you are in a bit of a different sphere, but nonetheless use data and storytelling to convey ideas. And so as you're either working with students or talking with other people about using these skills, how would you say that data is really important, how do you execute in using data for storytelling, and how do you really get started?
Well, one thing I think about a lot is that the data is like the raw material of the story, but but how you tell that story is entirely up to you. The order that you tell it in is up to you. You can start at the end and then go back to the beginning and then proceed forward. You can decide that this part that you once thought was the beginning is actually not the beginning, and the beginning comes earlier, you know. I don't think I mentioned also that I'm a fiction writer and I have training in literature. So I think a lot about the structures of stories. And this is something that I think can sometimes be overlooked when we're trying to tell a story about a lived experience. You know, we think, I have this lived experience, I know it, so I'm just going to tell it. And you might be getting the information across, but you might not be structuring in a way that delivers the impact that you want as much as you want, you know? And so that's just something I try to think about. I think, what's the best way for me to organize this? Usually it's about, you know, I mean, using almost that kind of classic plot structure that you see with the rising action leading to a climax of some sort and a resolution. It's useful to be aware of that and know that by kind of loading the important things onto, you know, the ends of paragraphs or the ends of sections, and understanding the beats that you're trying to hit, you know, you don't need to get to overthink it, but just kind of being conscious of the structure of your story as a choice can help us a lot in crafting our narratives into things that can cross boundaries and communicate to other people.
That's a really interesting way to think about it that I haven't quite thought about before. Thank you for sharing that.
Cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. Kayleigh, I know that you work in a different sphere as well in the area of nonprofit grant writing and reporting, and I know that you also use data in a totally different way. Would you share with us your perspective on how you think data can be used to tell a story?
Sure. Yeah. In grants, it can be kind of all over the place. And so, like, for example, in a lot of situations, I've got like 200 words to try to convince a funder that the cause I'm working on or the thing that we're trying to get funded is worth their investment. And so I think something that I really think about a lot is that data is important, but it's also, you know, if you're just throwing a bunch of statistics and they're not really supporting the message that you're trying to get across, it can be more distracting than anything. And so I would totally echo what Isabel and Jeff just said about, like, there's this mixture that you need of data and support for your points, but also that story and that compelling part is really, really important too. And so I always just try to think, like, what is super relevant? What's the main thing I need to get across? And I need to stick with this person if I've only got their attention for a super short amount of time. And so that's something that I use all the time when I'm trying to frame my messaging.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah. Okay, so the next question that we'd like to talk about is we've so far talked about data and how that can connect with testifying and with sharing a story. And we know too that perhaps data can fit into other aspects of your life as well. So Jeff, would you be willing to tell us some of your thoughts and suggestions for how data and also researching and argumentation can fit into other aspects of your life as a whole?
For sure. So I think, so right now I really quickly want to point to the example of the speech that Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez gave a few days ago. Is it only a couple days ago? Time passes so strangely now. But she gave this incredible speech, of course, right? And I follow her on Instagram, and she shared a image of an open journal that had like a couple notes on it. And she basically said, yeah, I took some notes a little bit about the speech, but it was mostly extemporaneous. I'm paraphrasing here, of course. And I think on the one hand, it's so incredible to be able to see someone give a speech like that more or less off the cuff. And you're like, God, how do they do that? On the other hand, it makes a lot of sense that she did that because this was not a subject that was unfamiliar to her. As I think, again, I'm paraphrasing, as she said in her post, she had been doing the research, quote unquote, and collecting data on this subject, both in like a large scope scale and in her own personal experience for a long time, maybe her whole life, depending on how you think about it. So that 5 minutes that you have when you're giving a testimony at a city council meeting, everything that you can bring to that can be useful. And so I think it's a good idea to think of it as research isn't just a thing that I do when I have a thing that I need to write or say. Research is something that I'm doing constantly. And I mean, really, all of us more or less live this now. We live in this information age. We're constantly getting new information. But I think it's good to kind of craft practices and build a structure into your life in which you're consciously trying to expand your understanding of things or deepen your understanding of things. So there's that element to it. And I think there's this other element that I want to talk about, and maybe this isn't quite the right time to do it, so feel free to cut me off if I'm derailing things. But I think it's one of the things that's so difficult about engaging in debate is which narrative is a part of. You know, when we're testifying at a city council meeting, we're debating with the other folks who are testifying at that same meeting or at other meetings. And engaging in debate can get really tricky, especially since there are a lot of pitfalls that we might not all be aware of. So like as a kid who was on debate teams, I never did debate myself, but I certainly rubbed shoulders with the kids on the debate half of the team, you know. Logical fallacies are a subject that every kind of speech and debate kid gets exposed to at some point. And so I think it's useful to be able to understand what a logical fallacy is. The definition, I guess, is an error of logic or an error of argumentation. And if you go on Purdue University's online writing lab, the Purdue OWL, they have a list of logical fallacies. If you just Google Purdue OWL logical fallacies, you'll find them. And I think it's good for us to kind of understand and be able to name the kind of argumentative pitfalls that people make, because they're really common, especially when you're working against any kind of oppressive system. So for example, there's the logical fallacy of the straw man argument, which if we're familiar with, a straw man is when someone is making an argument and then I, as their opponent, construct a oversimplified, kind of flimsy version of their argument. And then I argue with that flimsy version, the straw man, instead of the actual argument that the person's making. And we see this all the time right now with this argument about defunding the police. Because among the folks who are in favor of defunding police, we know that there's a very robust set of policy ideas that people are coming up with. Not everyone on this camp agrees exactly on how to defund the police and what the best way to do it is and where to reallocate those funds. There's a lot of thought and work that people are putting into this. And yet so often we see people who are against defunding the police making this claim that what folks are arguing for is just get rid of police and have no other system in place. And that's going to be it. And that's a logical fallacy. That's them making a straw man, so to speak, of the argument in favor of defunding the police. And so it's useful to be able to name and identify these sorts of logical fallacies so that we can know how to respond to them or whether we just need to dismiss them entirely. So that's something else that I wanted to kind of mention.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Isabel, was there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think that that's super fascinating because I've never thought of it in that way. But now I'm thinking like, oh, that's exactly what I'm doing when I'm talking with my colleagues or my friends or anything, when we're thinking like, okay, what opposition could we come up against? And how do we respond to that? But I really appreciate that. And I'm going to look at this website really soon, because I heard a lot of these things during the floor debate today at the state legislature when they were talking about LB 814, which would restrict a woman's right to have an abortion in so many different ways. And so there was both like you're bad people if you want this to happen, and sort of those arguments. So that's really fascinating. I guess I just want to add that something that I've had to internalize a lot because I like to be right, is that you can always, if someone asks you a question or there's something that you're not very well versed in, you can always say, I don't know, instead of acting like you know the answer to everything that you have, that you're presenting, or everything about your argument. Not to say that you shouldn't be well researched and have your points very clearly stated, but you can absolutely defer to the experts. You could say, I don't know, why don't you ask my friends at the ACLU who are also here? Or I don't know, that's not my experience, but I can follow up with you with different information. Saying I don't know is a great way to avoid some of these logical fallacies too. And when people are posing impossible questions for you that are only going to make you look bad if you answer them, or if you say I don't want to answer that question, you can just say I don't know. And I think that that's something that I've had to internalize a lot, but something that has been super helpful when you're in these sticky debates where one side really does not want to hear you or does not want to accept your argument or even consider it, because that's another thing that was happening on the floor today, is that people were very stuck in their perspectives and were not open to listening to the perspectives of experts, medical doctors, facts and figures, anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's especially important to keep in mind with just how kind of divisive issues feel nowadays. So I think those are all really important points. Jeff, I know you have a lot of experience as a formal speech person. Do you want to give us kind of some tips on how do you prepare? How do you make sure that you feel confident? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. One of the best things that you can do, I think, is try as best as you can to simulate the experience that you are going to go through when you are speaking. For so many of us, even if we're in a relatively low stakes scenario, like, giving a speech in a classroom or giving a toast at a wedding where we're surrounded by people who like us, even in those situations, speaking can be really nerve-wracking. So in a more high stakes situation where you're talking to a legislative body or you're advocating on issues that are going to make real impact on people's lives, you can get real it can get real nerve-wracking, and practice is so important. So it might be easy to think that by practicing I'm just going to kind of run over the speech in my head, but if you have the opportunity to practice out loud at full you'll then do it, and that way you can feel in your body what it feels like to speak. If you're knowing that you're going to be giving speeches more or less extemporaneously from like hastily made notes, then practice doing that. Practice on a topic, making a couple points, jotting them down, and then generating a speech out of that. Do that as much as you can, if you can do it for a person, for an audience. Right now, of course, we got to socially distance, right? But if there's some kind of situation where you can hash things out with a listener and get their feedback, that's a great thing to do. And Isabel was already kind of talking about how, as a group, your organization will, you'll show up and be like, we're representing renters together. And so on the one hand, it gives you this kind of clout of having like a brand, right? But also, I'm sure that you all as a group were meeting and hashing out ideas with each other, and maybe even figuring out one person will tackle this idea in the meeting, and then this other person with their testimony will tackle this idea. And that way you kind of eliminate redundancies and come at it from multiple angles. So all of this kind of preparation that happens behind the scenes can make for a really effective set of testimonies at a given meeting.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Jeff. I think that that's the power of having people, even if it's you and one other person. Sometimes there's so much density to our issues that we're talking about. And so splitting it up between people so that there's no redundancies and you can get your whole message out is really great. Because I know that even though elected representatives have to listen to their constituents, it kind of starts to annoy them a little bit if every single person is saying the same thing. And I've seen neighborhood associations do this successfully before too. So I think that that's a really great point.
All right, we're getting some really good questions in the Q&A, so I want to make sure we have some time at the end for those. But really quick, I know that we have, there's actually a lot of great local sources of data, which are, that's my dog.
The dog agrees.
Yeah, which, you know, I feel personally like the more local the data that you can get, like the better. It just makes things really compelling, especially for decision makers that are supposed to listen to their constituents. And so I think, you know, we have in that Google Doc we shared out, we included a few of the really great local data sources that we have available. And one of those is like brand new and really cool. So I'm going to turn it over to Lee, who actually helped compile all of that data.
Sure, yeah. So I, through my job at the Asian Community and Cultural Center, I also collaborate with several of the organizations that work with the New Americans Task Force. And so we completed a survey during the first half of 2019. And the intent of the survey was to collect data from immigrants and refugees in Lincoln to get a better sense of their experiences and some challenges that they may be facing of living in our community. And the reason for this is that we know one of the most effective ways to inform programming or to learn more about the experiences of people is, of course, to just ask them. And so this is one of the most, I think it's the most comprehensive data set from this population in our community. And we're really thrilled to be able to use that and to have access to that. When we were developing the survey and the questions that we were going to ask, we worked with several partner agencies that are working with the New Americans Task Force. And some of these include the Cultural Centers of Lincoln, Civic Nebraska, Nebraska Appleseed, Lincoln Literacy. And there are so many more that were also instrumental in putting together the content, making sure that the data that we hope to gather was useful. And then, of course, making sure that the questions were culturally informed and respectful of people's experiences. And so we gathered over 500 responses, which we're super excited about because it was an incredibly long, time-consuming survey. It was about 45 questions. And so it took some people quite a while to finish it. Yep. And so we're thrilled to be able to have these results because they indicate information about topics ranging from civic engagement to housing to health to use of social spaces like parks and libraries. And we tried to ask questions that would go beyond some of the ones that you might normally see to things like for voting, for example, were you a registered voter in your home country? And do you feel like you have the information you need to vote here if you're an eligible voter? And so we're really excited that we have this information because now we can use that to inform next steps. Like for barriers that folks have, such as difficulty in making ends meet, for example, how can we address that problem as a community? And the first step, of course, is to use the data to look at where the needs are. So,
yeah, thanks for walking us through that. So I want to make sure that we've got some really great questions. So I'm really excited to hear your guys' thoughts. This first question is, how do you manage the influx of information that's just rampant right now? Are you looking at sources that you've already decided to follow? Or are you kind of like going through all of these different things and deciding what you need to pick and choose?
I like that, trawling through a glut.
It's pretty solid wording.
Does anyone else want to take this to start? Okay, I have some thoughts. Well, I think, of course, it's going to depend on what area you're. Sarah, this is a great question, by the way. I think it's going to depend on what like area of information you're thinking about. I think it's a good idea to something that I try to do is I try to be keep relatively aware of important things going on in the news as best I can. But then I also try to have specific areas that I know that I am particularly interested in and focused on. And that's stuff that I try to follow really deeply. So, for example, I'm really interested in public memory spaces and how Americans, especially white Americans, use public memory to construct their identity for themselves. When I look at a monument, what does that monument tell me about me, right? And obviously, there's a lot of conversation right now in recent months about monuments, especially Confederate monuments, and so I've been kind of specifically on the lookout for anything like that. Friends of mine know that I'm interested in it, so they send me articles if they see it, which is great. And I also look for, there's like the surface level, quick information, journalistic sources that I'll look for, and then I also try and couple that with deeper sources. Like there's a book called Race and Reunion by the historian David Blight that tracks how public memory started in the years following the Civil War for like the first 50 years. And that's a kind of more academic book, but it goes really in depth. And so being able to kind of bring together these different scopes of surface level, or not surface, but, current stuff, and then real deep information from reliable sources that I feel like I trust because I kind of get to know them through their work. That's one strategy that I take.
I think that trustworthiness is really key, Jeff, because you can, by the language that someone is using through their, articles or anything that you're reading on, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, you can kind of tell if they have strong feelings about something or another, or if they're simply stating the facts and making an argument in a way that's not so, inflammatory. I was going to say flammable, but that's not it.
Flammable works.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of how I learned how to manage my own consumption of information, was, I love it when people agree with me, but I'm not going to go to, for example, those websites that have like listicles where they're just like listing a bunch of things. I'm not going to go there for like my current resource of news. I'm going to go to places that have like a nuanced argument. And although sometimes I may disagree with their arguments and their conclusions, I'm thinking of one writer at the New York Times, David Brooks, who came here to the university a few years ago. Even though I might disagree with him, I do think that he's making an argument in a way that is using maybe a little bit influenced by his perspective, but also is an argument that's based on data and what he's perceiving in the world, although it's kind of like biased because he's a white man.
Sure.
But yeah, that's all that I wanted to add. But it is a what did you say? A trudge of glut.
Trawling through a glut.
Yeah. And actually, if I may add one other thing, I think it's a good idea to be really conscious of the news sources that you take in and to intentionally seek out multiple perspectives like you're talking about, Isabel. So, I try to kind of avoid TV news. I mean, it shows up on my YouTube, but it's good to look at NPR, but then it's also good to look at BBC or Al Jazeera, so that you can kind of see multiple takes on the same story. And then you'll not be so bound by one writer's reading of it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really common pitfall that people fall into, and pretty easy to get stuck in an echo chamber if you're not careful.
Yes.
So there's another really good question. I think we've touched on parts of this, but I think this is a great chance to kind of do some more specific examples. So this person asked, can you share a story of when you successfully advocated for an issue or where you felt you were heard? How long did you prepare for it? Did you collaborate with anyone? And, we've mentioned coordinating with some friends before.
I always think of the example that I experienced early on when I was just a year into working with South of Downtown. And anyone, tell me if you remember this, the 13th Street renovation project.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, because you were there, right? Weren't you, Jeff?
I was there.
Yeah. So this project was all set to go to change 13th Street from 4 lanes, 2 ways either way, to 1 lane either way and a turning lane in the middle with additionally bike paths along the sides. They were not the reason for the street change. They're just additional because we had extra space. And so there was this website that came out that LIBA, the Lincoln Independent Business Association, put out that said it was on a black background with bright yellow letters, the war on cars. And I was just like, oh my God. So they were explicitly ignoring the expertise of traffic experts that said that the new street layout had dramatically fewer crash points or potential crash points, as well as noting the volume of the traffic on that street, on the path, the section of the street was totally feasible to convert it to this new layout. And so council member Roy Christensen introduced a resolution to basically stop the renovation of 13th Street. And that was really shocking to me because it was something that didn't have to go through city council. There's money already in the budget. So we had to do a massive campaign for this. And so myself and then a really great neighborhood advocate, Cassie Lottman, we stood outside one day outside of the F Street Church. And we just stood on that block of that corner of 13th and F and just asked people, will you sign this postcard? Like, did you feel safe crossing just now? And so we got a lot of people to sign these postcards. So we made it very easy to get involved. All you have to do is sign a postcard and write a sentence or two. And we also provided it directly to them. So we weren't asking people to come to us. We were going to where the people already were. Another thing that 13th Street did was install the rapid flashing beacons of light so that, and you can, if you don't know this, you will know this now. Whenever the lights are flashing, first of all, you have to step out into the street, which is something weird in our state laws. But the cars are supposed to stop for you. So you don't have to wait for cars to pass. They're supposed to stop for you as soon as you start walking that street. And those lights are supposed to make it easier to see. And one of those is placed right outside of the F Street Center, where there's a lot of kids who go between F Street Center. There's El Chaparro right there. There's the F Street Church. So it's a really, really active corner. And on top of this, a lot of people in our neighborhood don't have cars. So they get around on bike or on foot. So we also use the appeal of making it safer. My colleague, or my former colleague, Jewel Rogers, who's an amazing orator. She's just phenomenal. She talked about her experiences working with the kids at F Street Center. And if there was a way that we could make the street safer for those kids, then we should just do it because it makes sense, first of all, logistically. And why wouldn't we protect kids in the neighborhood who are utilizing the street, who are just getting around and living their day-to-day life? So that was really great. So first of all, I had help with my colleagues, help with friends who were collecting postcards with me. And then everyone was just reaching out to their networks and asking folks if they want to come testify. And so I think in total, we had 32 people come testify in opposition to the thing that would stop it. So testify for the plan to proceed. And we got a seven votes. Roy Christensen, who introduced the resolution, voted against his own resolution, which was just a phenomenal win in the way that we were able to divide power, get all of these different perspectives, talk about the neighborhood and the logistics, but also our own personal experiences and our ties with the neighborhood. It was just phenomenal.
Yeah, it was really cool being there. I was not super involved from the get-go. I just found out about it through social media and through some friends. They were like, Jeff, come, we need the numbers. We need some people at this. You're pretty good at speaking. Maybe you can say something. But like, they're about to try and rescind this obviously good decision. And it was amazing to see. So it was just like such a long meeting with just like a long line of people giving different kinds of insight. There were personal narratives. There were people who there were personal narratives. There was a traffic expert who was there, who he just took an interest in it, and he was like, I haven't been working on this project, but let me just tell you my analysis. And he went right through it, and it all kind of coalesced together and was really successful. That was an instance where I think it was a relatively simple issue, like compared to an issue like defund the police, and so I think it was kind of easy for a lot of people to get behind, but it does show how powerful it can be when a huge multitude of voices show up at a city council meeting and say different specific things and make it happen.
That's really powerful. So thanks for that, like just super awesome and really specific and great example. So I know we're getting close to time here, and also thank you to the audience members for those great questions. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So first we want to say thank you so much to Jeff and Isabel for coming and talking to us about this really important stuff today. I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel way more confident in how to go and testify and engage. So thank you for that. We also want to do a quick shout out to our wonderful producer, Matt Knapp. Thank you, Matt. And to our partners at Civic Nebraska.
And also, as you know, this is week 2 of our series Calling for Change. And next week we will be having another event with Civic Nebraska again. And we are really excited to have our partners, John Cartier and Brad Christian Salas, who will be talking about voting by mail. So please join us for that. We're really looking forward to that conversation with you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
I certainly want to say thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, take it away.
All right, I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Super fun. I love to go into these discussions, talk about it. Fun.
It's great to learn from both of your, from everybody here's expertise and perspectives on this. And I don't usually have the opportunity to grill people on data, so I love that. So thank you. Yeah.
Have a great rest of your night.
Bye.